The rain had been falling for hours when the package arrived. It sat alone on the front step of Noah Carter's apartment building, soaked around the edges but somehow untouched by the weather. Noah almost walked past it. He had spent the entire day editing footage for his online documentary channel, a growing platform dedicated to unsolved crimes and forgotten disappearances. Strange packages occasionally appeared from viewers who hoped he would investigate their favorite mysteries. Most contained newspaper clippings. Some contained nothing useful at all. This one felt different. There was no return address. No shipping label. Only his name written across the front in faded black ink. Noah carried it upstairs and placed it on his desk beneath the glow of a single lamp. The cardboard looked decades old. Dust coated the seams. Something inside rattled softly. He opened it. A small cassette tape rested in the center. Nothing else. No note. No explanation. A strip of yellowing masking tape had been attached to the cassette. Across it, written in uneven handwriting, were 2 words. Story number 1. Noah frowned. That's it. He turned the cassette over in his hands. The plastic felt old and brittle. Curiosity quickly replaced caution. A few minutes later he dug an aging cassette player from a storage box in his closet. He had purchased it years earlier while researching a documentary. After inserting fresh batteries, he pressed play. Static filled the room. Several seconds passed. Then a woman's voice emerged. Soft. Shaking. Terrified. If anyone finds this recording, please don't stop listening. Noah sat upright. The woman introduced herself as Evelyn Harper. She claimed she had been missing for 6 months. According to the recording, she was hiding inside an abandoned farmhouse somewhere outside a small rural town called Black Hollow. The details sounded impossible. Evelyn spoke as if someone was hunting her. Watching her. Following her every move. Several times she paused to listen for noises beyond the walls. Each interruption made Noah feel increasingly uneasy. The recording continued. Days seemed to pass between segments. Evelyn sounded weaker each time she returned. Then came the part that made Noah freeze. I know what they'll say when they find this, she whispered. They'll say I'm dead. Silence followed. A long silence. Then she laughed. Not happily. The sound was broken. Almost defeated. The strange thing is, they'll be right. The tape ended moments later. Noah stared at the machine. His pulse had quickened. Something about the woman's fear felt genuine. Too genuine. Within an hour he began searching public records. The name existed. Evelyn Harper. Missing. Declared dead 11 years earlier. No body had ever been found. The case received little media attention and eventually disappeared from public discussion. Noah spent the next 2 days gathering information. Old newspaper archives. Police reports. Property records. Everything pointed toward a single location. An abandoned farmhouse 20 miles outside Black Hollow. On the 3rd day he drove there. The structure stood alone among endless fields. Broken windows stared across the countryside like empty eyes. The front door hung partially open. Dust covered every surface inside. The place looked untouched for years. Yet as Noah moved through the house, details from the recording matched perfectly. The staircase. The kitchen. The cracked wallpaper. Even the upstairs attic where Evelyn claimed she had hidden during her final days. There, beneath scattered boards, Noah found something unexpected. Another cassette tape. His hands trembled as he picked it up. This one carried no label. That night he returned home and immediately placed the newly discovered tape into the player. Static crackled. A familiar voice emerged. Evelyn. She sounded frightened. More frightened than before. Then another voice answered her. A man's voice. Noah's breath caught instantly. The voice sounded exactly like him. Every word. Every inflection. Every pause. He listened in disbelief as the conversation continued. Then terror settled into his chest. Because the man wasn't merely speaking. He was speaking directly to Evelyn. And discussing events that had supposedly happened 11 years ago. Events Noah had never experienced. Yet somehow the voice knew things only he could know. As the tape continued, Evelyn asked a single question. The answer came from Noah's own voice. And he had absolutely no memory of saying it. The conversation continued from the second cassette long after Noah should have stopped listening. He replayed the final minutes repeatedly, trying to convince himself that exhaustion was distorting what he heard. It wasn't. The voice was his. Not similar. Not familiar. Identical. Yet before he could process that impossible discovery, another section of the recording began. A soft click echoed through the speakers. Then Evelyn Harper spoke again. "If you're hearing this," she whispered, "you need to understand what happened to Sarah Whitmore. Everything started with her." Static crackled. And the first nightmare story unfolded. Chapter 2, The Woman in the Cornfield. 10 years before Evelyn Harper disappeared, the quiet farming town of Black Hollow had been shaken by another mystery. Sarah Whitmore vanished without a trace. She had been married for only 8 months. Photographs from that time showed a cheerful young woman with bright eyes and an easy smile. Friends described her as kind, independent, and deeply devoted to her husband, Ethan Whitmore. Their marriage appeared perfect. At least from the outside. The morning Sarah disappeared, Ethan claimed he woke to find her gone. Her clothes were missing. Her car remained parked outside. No signs of struggle existed anywhere inside the house. According to Ethan, his wife had simply decided to leave. Police initially accepted the explanation. After all, adults sometimes disappeared voluntarily. But small inconsistencies began surfacing almost immediately. Sarah had left behind her purse, her phone, her wedding ring. Most troubling of all, she had abandoned her beloved younger sister without saying goodbye. Those who knew Sarah found that impossible to believe. Months passed. Search teams combed forests, fields, and nearby roads. Nothing was found. The case slowly grew cold. Then strange reports started arriving from local residents. Several farmers claimed they had seen lights near an abandoned grain silo standing on the edge of town. The structure had been deserted for years. Most people avoided it. Yet witnesses described seeing movement around it late at night. Some even reported hearing voices beneath the ground. Authorities dismissed the stories as rumors. Until Deputy Rachel Monroe decided to investigate. Rachel was young and relentless. Unlike many others, she never believed Sarah had run away. The abandoned silo sat surrounded by towering cornfields that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. When Rachel first visited, the place appeared empty. Rust covered the metal walls. The entrance had nearly collapsed. Yet something felt wrong. She couldn't explain it. While searching the property, she noticed faint footprints leading behind the structure. The tracks disappeared near a patch of overgrown weeds. Curious, Rachel pushed through the vegetation. Beneath it she discovered a hidden hatch. Her pulse quickened. The hatch opened into a narrow underground chamber. The air smelled stale. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling. Blankets covered one corner. Food containers lined another. Someone had been living there. Recently. Rachel immediately requested backup. The discovery shocked the town. Investigators searched the underground space for evidence. What they found raised even more questions. Dozens of photographs covered one wall. Every photo featured Sarah Whitmore. Pictures of her shopping, walking home, working at a diner, standing in her own backyard. Many had clearly been taken without her knowledge. Sarah had been stalked. For months. Possibly years. The revelation transformed the investigation overnight. Attention shifted away from Ethan and toward the mysterious occupant of the hidden bunker. Whoever lived beneath the silo had obsessively monitored Sarah's life. But identifying that person proved difficult. No fingerprints matched any records. No DNA produced useful leads. The stalker seemed to have vanished. Even so, Rachel wasn't satisfied. The more she reviewed Ethan's statements, the more problems she noticed. His timeline changed repeatedly. Witnesses contradicted portions of his story. Financial records revealed mounting debts he had never disclosed. Then another secret emerged. Sarah had recently contacted a divorce attorney. She had planned to leave him. Suddenly Ethan's perfect image began crumbling. The devoted husband became a possible suspect. Town gossip exploded. Friends chose sides. Some insisted Ethan was innocent. Others became convinced he had murdered his wife. Weeks later, investigators returned to the underground bunker for a more extensive excavation. Heavy equipment arrived. Workers carefully removed layers of dirt beneath the chamber. By sunset, one of them uncovered something horrifying. Human bones. The site immediately became a crime scene. Rachel watched as forensic teams worked through the night. Everyone assumed the remains belonged to Sarah. The entire town did. Even Ethan appeared shaken when the news spread. But 3 days later the laboratory results arrived. Rachel read the report twice. Then a third time. Her hands trembled. The remains were not Sarah Whitmore. They belonged to an unidentified male who had died years earlier. Which meant Sarah was still missing. And somewhere beyond the cornfields, another victim's story was waiting to be uncovered. The disappearance of Owen Parker began as every parent's worst nightmare. One moment he was there. The next he was gone. Owen was 8 years old when his family traveled to Pine Ridge National Forest for a weekend camping trip. It was supposed to be a celebration before the school year began. His father, Mark, had spent weeks planning the trip. His mother, Lisa, packed enough supplies for twice the expected stay. For the first day, everything felt normal. The family hiked trails, cooked meals over a campfire, took photographs beside a crystal-clear lake. Nothing suggested disaster was approaching. On the second evening, Owen wandered only a short distance from the campsite to collect firewood. He never returned. At first his parents assumed he was playing nearby. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Soon panic replaced confusion. Mark searched the surrounding woods while Lisa called his name until her voice became raw. Night fell. Owen remained missing. Authorities launched one of the largest search operations in the region's history. Hundreds of volunteers combed the forest. Search dogs followed trails that suddenly vanished. Helicopters scanned the area from above. No evidence appeared. No footprints. No clothing. No signs of an accident. It was as if Owen had simply disappeared from existence. Weeks became months. Months became years. Eventually the searches stopped. The case remained open, but hope slowly faded. Lisa refused to accept it. Every birthday she decorated Owen's empty bedroom. Every Christmas she wrapped gifts that no one opened. Friends urged her to move forward. She couldn't. The uncertainty consumed her life. Her marriage suffered. Her health deteriorated. Still, she continued searching. 3 years later, everything changed. A highway patrol officer discovered a young boy walking alone beside a remote road nearly 200 miles from Pine Ridge. The child appeared calm, healthy, uninjured. When officers approached, he quietly identified himself. "I'm Owen Parker." The announcement stunned investigators. Within hours, national media outlets descended upon the small town where he had been found. Lisa rushed to the police station. The reunion was emotional. Tears flowed freely. Cameras captured the moment. To the outside world, it seemed like a miracle. But something felt wrong. Very wrong. The boy looked like Owen. He sounded like Owen. Yet Lisa immediately sensed a difference. The child who returned wasn't the same boy who disappeared. His personality had changed completely. Before vanishing, Owen had been energetic and talkative. Now he spoke only when necessary. His expressions rarely changed. He avoided physical affection. Most disturbing of all, he refused to discuss where he had spent the previous 3 years. Whenever anyone asked, he offered the same response. "I don't remember." Doctors evaluated him extensively. Psychologists suggested trauma-induced memory loss. Investigators considered countless possibilities. Abduction, human trafficking, illegal adoption. None of the theories fit perfectly. Owen remained silent. As months passed, Lisa became increasingly obsessed with finding answers. She carefully watched her son's behavior, recorded conversations, studied old videos, compared every detail. The more she observed, the more unsettled she became. Certain habits seemed entirely new. He preferred foods he once hated. He wrote differently. Even his posture had changed. Late one evening, Lisa entered Owen's room while he slept. She felt guilty for invading his privacy. But desperation had replaced reason long ago. While searching through a desk drawer, she discovered a small metal box hidden beneath folded clothes. Inside were dozens of photographs. Her hands trembled as she examined them. At first the images appeared ordinary. Owen standing near playgrounds, walking through parks, riding his bicycle. Then she noticed something horrifying. The dates. Many photographs had been taken months before Owen vanished. Some nearly a year earlier. And in the background of every picture stood the same unfamiliar man. Watching. Waiting. Sometimes close. Sometimes distant. Always present. The final photograph nearly stopped Lisa's heart. It showed Owen sitting beside the man on a park bench. Both smiling. The picture had been taken 6 months before the camping trip. Which meant the impossible was true. Whoever had taken Owen hadn't been a stranger. The relationship had started long before the disappearance. And somewhere hidden within those photographs was the identity of the person who had been preparing Owen for years before finally taking him away. The mansion stood alone at the end of a narrow road surrounded by dense woodland. Most locals avoided it. They referred to it simply as Hollow House. No one seemed eager to discuss its history. When Emily Hart received notice that she had inherited the property from a distant relative she barely remembered, she assumed some mistake had occurred. Emily was 34 years old and worked as a psychiatric nurse in a regional hospital. Her life followed a predictable routine built around long shifts, exhausted patients, and quiet evenings alone. The inheritance changed everything. The relative, Eleanor Voss, had died at 92. Emily recalled meeting her only once as a child. The decision made little sense. Yet the legal documents were genuine. 2 weeks later she arrived at the property. The mansion was enormous. Weathered stone walls rose behind rusted gates. Dark windows overlooked the forest. At first glance the place appeared abandoned. Inside, however, everything remained strangely intact. Furniture sat exactly where it had been left. Books filled towering shelves. Dust covered nearly every surface. But one detail immediately caught Emily's attention. There were no mirrors. Not a single one. Bathrooms stood empty. Bedrooms lacked dressing mirrors. Even decorative wall pieces appeared to have been removed. The absence felt unsettling. Almost deliberate. Emily spent the first day exploring. Room after room revealed signs of careful organization. Nothing suggested chaos or neglect. The missing mirrors seemed to be the only unusual feature. That changed on her second evening. While unpacking supplies, she discovered a locked door hidden behind shelves in a library. The lock was old. Corroded. Yet surprisingly strong. After nearly an hour of effort, she forced it open. A staircase descended into darkness. Cold air drifted upward. Emily hesitated before continuing. The basement stretched far beneath the mansion. Several rooms connected through narrow hallways lined with filing cabinets and storage boxes. At the far end stood rows of journals. Hundreds of them. Every volume was carefully labeled by date. Curiosity overcame caution. Emily opened one. Then another. And another. What she discovered disturbed her deeply. The journals documented decades of psychological observations. Names filled the pages. Patients. Family members. Neighbors. Friends. Each individual had been subjected to subtle emotional manipulation. Conversations were recorded. Reactions analyzed. Relationships deliberately influenced. The entries read less like personal diaries and more like scientific experiments. Many described methods for controlling behavior through isolation, fear, affection, and deception. Emily's nursing experience made the material even more alarming. Whoever wrote the journals possessed extensive knowledge of human psychology. And they had used that knowledge without restraint. Over the following days, Emily became consumed by the collection. She spent hours reading. Then entire nights. Patterns slowly emerged. Eleanor Voss appeared convinced that personality could be reshaped through carefully engineered experiences. According to the journals, trauma could be manufactured. Trust could be weaponized. Reality itself could be altered. Soon strange things began happening. At first Emily blamed exhaustion. She heard footsteps in empty rooms. Brief whispers behind closed doors. Shadows moving beyond her peripheral vision. The incidents grew worse. One night she woke to see a woman standing at the foot of her bed. The figure vanished when she switched on the lamp. Another evening she heard someone calling her name from an upstairs hallway. No one was there. The hallucinations felt terrifyingly real. As a psychiatric nurse, Emily understood the warning signs. Yet awareness provided little comfort. The mansion seemed to be affecting her. Or perhaps the journals were. Desperate for answers, she returned to the basement. There she discovered a volume hidden inside a locked cabinet. Unlike the others, this journal appeared recently written. Its final pages contained entries spanning several months. Emily turned to the last completed section. Her breath caught instantly. The date written at the top had not arrived yet. It was 3 days in the future. Confused, she continued reading. The entry described events in precise detail. A power outage. A broken staircase railing. A deep cut across her left hand. Emily stared at the page in disbelief. The prediction seemed absurd. 3 days later, during a violent storm, the mansion lost power. Hours afterward, a staircase railing collapsed beneath her grip. As she fell, jagged wood sliced across her left hand exactly as described. Bleeding and terrified, Emily remembered the journal. And for the first time, she wondered whether the next entry might already be waiting somewhere beneath the house. The mansion stood alone at the end of a narrow road surrounded by dense woodland. Most locals avoided it. They referred to it simply as Hollow House. No one seemed eager to discuss its history. When Emily Hart received notice that she had inherited the property from a distant relative she barely remembered, she assumed some mistake had occurred. Emily was 34 years old and worked as a psychiatric nurse in a regional hospital. Her life followed a predictable routine built around long shifts, exhausted patients, and quiet evenings alone. The inheritance changed everything. The relative, Eleanor Voss, had died at 92. Emily recalled meeting her only once as a child. The decision made little sense. Yet the legal documents were genuine. 2 weeks later she arrived at the property. The mansion was enormous. Weathered stone walls rose behind rusted gates. Dark windows overlooked the forest. At first glance the place appeared abandoned. Inside, however, everything remained strangely intact. Furniture sat exactly where it had been left. Books filled towering shelves. Dust covered nearly every surface. But one detail immediately caught Emily's attention. There were no mirrors. Not a single one. Bathrooms stood empty. Bedrooms lacked dressing mirrors. Even decorative wall pieces appeared to have been removed. The absence felt unsettling. Almost deliberate. Emily spent the first day exploring. Room after room revealed signs of careful organization. Nothing suggested chaos or neglect. The missing mirrors seemed to be the only unusual feature. That changed on her second evening. While unpacking supplies, she discovered a locked door hidden behind shelves in a library. The lock was old. Corroded. Yet surprisingly strong. After nearly an hour of effort, she forced it open. A staircase descended into darkness. Cold air drifted upward. Emily hesitated before continuing. The basement stretched far beneath the mansion. Several rooms connected through narrow hallways lined with filing cabinets and storage boxes. At the far end stood rows of journals. Hundreds of them. Every volume was carefully labeled by date. Curiosity overcame caution. Emily opened one. Then another. And another. What she discovered disturbed her deeply. The journals documented decades of psychological observations. Names filled the pages. Patients. Family members. Neighbors. Friends. Each individual had been subjected to subtle emotional manipulation. Conversations were recorded. Reactions analyzed. Relationships deliberately influenced. The entries read less like personal diaries and more like scientific experiments. Many described methods for controlling behavior through isolation, fear, affection, and deception. Emily's nursing experience made the material even more alarming. Whoever wrote the journals possessed extensive knowledge of human psychology, and they had used that knowledge without restraint. Over the following days, Emily became consumed by the collection. She spent hours reading, then entire nights. Patterns slowly emerged. Eleanor Voss appeared convinced that personality could be reshaped through carefully engineered experiences. According to the journals, trauma could be manufactured. Trust could be weaponized. Reality itself could be altered. Soon strange things began happening. At first Emily blamed exhaustion. She heard footsteps in empty rooms, brief whispers behind closed doors, shadows moving beyond her peripheral vision. The incidents grew worse. One night she woke to see a woman standing at the foot of her bed. The figure vanished when she switched on the lamp. Another evening she heard someone calling her name from an upstairs hallway. No one was there. The hallucinations felt terrifyingly real. As a psychiatric nurse, Emily understood the warning signs. Yet awareness provided little comfort. The mansion seemed to be affecting her. Or perhaps the journals were. Desperate for answers, she returned to the basement. There she discovered a volume hidden inside a locked cabinet. Unlike the others, this journal appeared recently written. Its final pages contained entries spanning several months. Emily turned to the last completed section. Her breath caught instantly. The date written at the top had not arrived yet. It was 3 days in the future. Confused, she continued reading. The entry described events in precise detail. A power outage. A broken staircase railing. A deep cut across her left hand. Emily stared at the page in disbelief. The prediction seemed absurd. 3 days later, during a violent storm, the mansion lost power. Hours afterward a staircase railing collapsed beneath her grip. As she fell, jagged wood sliced across her left hand exactly as described. Bleeding and terrified, Emily remembered the journal. And for the first time, she wondered whether the next entry might already be waiting somewhere beneath the house. The fire destroyed almost everything. By the time firefighters contained the blaze, the old Victorian house on Willow Street had collapsed into a blackened skeleton of charred timber and smoke. Investigators initially believed the property had been abandoned for years. They were wrong. While searching through debris, a recovery worker discovered a small metal lockbox hidden beneath fallen floorboards. The box survived. Its contents changed everything. Inside were 37 sealed letters. None had ever been mailed. Each envelope was addressed to the same person. Daniel Mercer. The discovery attracted little attention at first. Then detectives opened the letters. Daniel Mercer had once been one of the state's most respected prosecutors. For nearly 2 decades, he built a reputation on winning difficult cases and securing convictions in high-profile crimes. His most famous victory involved the murder trial of Jacob Vance. The case had captivated the nation. Jacob was accused of murdering his business partner during a bitter financial dispute. Evidence against him appeared overwhelming. Witnesses testified. Forensic reports supported the prosecution. After a lengthy trial, Jacob received a life sentence. Daniel Mercer became a public hero. The letters threatened to destroy that legacy. Written over a period of 7 years, they revealed a secret romantic relationship between Mercer and Jacob Vance. Investigators were stunned. The letters described stolen meetings, private conversations, and emotional confessions that should never have existed between a prosecutor and the primary suspect in a murder investigation. The implications were devastating. If the relationship was genuine, the entire trial had been compromised. As more letters were examined, the situation grew worse. The correspondence suggested Daniel possessed information that never reached the courtroom. Certain witnesses appeared unreliable. Key evidence contained inconsistencies. Several investigative leads were quietly abandoned before trial. The deeper authorities dug, the more troubling the picture became. It no longer looked like simple misconduct. It looked deliberate. A special review panel was assembled. Retired detectives, legal experts, and forensic analysts began re-examining every aspect of the original investigation. Their findings raised disturbing possibilities. Important testimony may have been shaped behind the scenes. Evidence favorable to Jacob appeared minimized. Certain jurors may have been indirectly influenced. The case that once seemed airtight began unraveling. Public reaction was explosive. News organizations published daily updates. Families connected to the original trial demanded answers. Former colleagues denied knowing anything about Mercer's secret relationship. Yet the letters continued telling a different story. Many were emotional. Some were desperate. Others revealed increasing paranoia. Daniel frequently wrote about fear. Fear of exposure. Fear of consequences. Fear that someone else already knew the truth. One letter stood out from all the others. Unlike the rest, it remained unsealed. The handwriting appeared hurried. Almost frantic. The date was only weeks before the house fire. Investigators gathered as the document was carefully examined. The contents chilled everyone present. Daniel claimed he had uncovered evidence proving the murder case extended far beyond Jacob Vance. According to the letter, another individual had secretly influenced both the investigation and the trial. A person whose identity remained hidden for years. The letter described manipulation, blackmail, and psychological pressure reaching multiple levels of the justice system. Then came the final paragraphs. Daniel admitted he had participated. Not willingly at first. But eventually he became part of it. The words read like a confession. A confession to obstructing justice. To concealing evidence. To helping convict a man while protecting someone far more dangerous. The room fell silent as investigators reached the signature. One detective frowned. Another leaned closer. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then someone quietly repeated the name aloud. The confession was not signed by Daniel Mercer. It was signed by Eleanor Voss. The same Eleanor Voss who had been officially declared dead years earlier. And according to government records, she should never have been alive to write it. The attack should have killed her. Detectives agreed on that much. When Clara Bennett was found inside her apartment, she was barely alive. Severe head trauma. Multiple defensive wounds. Signs of a struggle that had lasted far longer than anyone should have survived. Yet somehow, she lived. Physically, she recovered. Mentally, she did not. Clara awoke from a medically induced coma 3 weeks after the assault. Doctors initially believed she would provide answers. Instead, they discovered something far more unusual. She couldn't remember the attack. Not a single detail. Worse still, she couldn't recall the hours leading up to it either. It was as if the entire night had been erased. But something changed in the days that followed. Clara began sleeping for long periods. Sometimes 12 hours. Sometimes more. And during those hours, she started to dream. At first, her nightmares were fragmented. Shadows. Voices. A feeling of being watched. But then the details sharpened. She described rooms she had never seen before. Conversations she couldn't possibly have heard. A man standing in her hallway holding something metallic. Detective Ryan Cole was assigned to her case. He was skeptical at first. Trauma often distorted memory. Dreams were unreliable evidence. But Clara's descriptions were too consistent to ignore. Each time she fell asleep, she provided more detail. Ryan began recording her sessions with medical supervision. Clara would wake, disoriented, and immediately describe what she had seen. "The man didn't come in through the door," she whispered during one session. "He was already inside when I turned off the light." Ryan frowned. "Can you describe him?" Clara hesitated. Then she nodded slowly. "Yes, but I think he saw me seeing him." Over time, the dreams became more structured. They no longer felt like fragments. They resembled memories. But memories of events Clara insisted had never happened. In one session, she described a sequence of events leading to the attack with disturbing clarity. She identified a specific time. A sound outside her window. A power flicker in the hallway. A phone call she ignored. Ryan checked the records. Everything matched reality. Except Clara had been unconscious during parts of what she described. The case shifted from assault investigation to psychological anomaly. Specialists were brought in. Some suggested cryptomnesia. Others proposed induced memory reconstruction. None of the explanations fully accounted for the precision. Then Clara began describing something else. The attacker's behavior changed in her dreams. He no longer appeared as a faceless shadow. He spoke. He planned. He watched her in ways that suggested awareness beyond physical reality. Ryan grew increasingly uneasy, especially when Clara began describing details she had not shared with anyone, not even police. One night, Clara requested to sleep without interruption. Against protocol, Ryan agreed under supervision. Medical staff monitored her closely. For the first few hours, everything appeared normal. Then her breathing changed. Her vitals stabilized in an unusual pattern. And Clara began speaking in her sleep. Her voice was calm. Too calm. "He's coming back," she murmured. Ryan leaned forward. "Who is coming back?" Clara didn't respond to him. Instead, she continued describing the dream. But this time, it was different. There was urgency in her tone. Specificity in her words. As if she were reporting something happening in real time. "He's entering the building now," she said softly. A nurse glanced toward the hallway. Nothing unusual. Security cameras showed empty corridors. Then Clara's voice sharpened. "He's in the elevator." Ryan felt a chill. He checked the building feed himself. Still nothing. Clara sat up suddenly in bed. Eyes closed. Speaking faster now. "He's on the 4th floor, he knows I'm awake." Alarms were not triggered. There was no breach detected. But Clara's breathing spiked. Then stopped. For exactly 6 seconds. And in that same moment, security footage from the apartment building across the street captured something impossible. A man entering Clara's floor at the exact time she had described. No signs of forced entry. No hesitation. As if he had been expected. Ryan rushed out into the hallway. The nurses followed. But before anyone reached her room, Clara's voice echoed one final time through the intercom system she had never touched. "He's here." The line went dead. When they finally entered the room, everything appeared normal. Clara was alive. Shaking. Eyes wide open. And staring directly at the door. Waiting. Because in her next words, she described a murder that had not yet been reported. And within hours, it happened exactly as she said it would. The death of Victor Hale was initially ruled as natural. A heart attack. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of struggle. A man alone in his apartment at the edge of the city, found sitting at his desk as if he had simply fallen asleep while working. But Detective Mara Ellison didn't believe it. Victor Hale had not been just any retiree. For 27 years, he worked as a private investigator. Not a flashy one. Not one known to the public. But within legal and investigative circles, his name carried weight. He specialized in what others refused to touch. Corruption. Missing persons. Internal misconduct. And most importantly, secrets people wanted buried. When Mara arrived at his apartment, she immediately noticed something wrong. The place was too organized. Too controlled. Drawers were labeled with precision. Files were sorted into categories that made no intuitive sense at first glance. Then she found the first hidden compartment behind a false panel in the wall. Inside were hundreds of folders. Each one meticulously documented. At first, Mara assumed they were old case files. Then she read the names. Judges. Police officers. Therapists. Business executives. Even politicians. Each file contained detailed accounts of alleged blackmail operations, covert meetings, and emotional leverage strategies used to manipulate powerful individuals. Some files included photographs. Others contained handwritten notes, audio transcripts, financial records. Everything pointed toward a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Victor Hale had been tracking a network. Not isolated incidents. A system. A structure of control operating beneath the surface of society. As investigators continued searching the apartment, more hidden compartments were discovered. Inside the desk, behind bookshelves, even beneath loose floor tiles. Every discovery added another layer to the same disturbing conclusion. Someone was orchestrating influence across multiple sectors of society, and Victor had been following their trail for years. Mara spent days reviewing the files. Sleep became secondary. The deeper she went, the more the investigation stopped resembling a traditional case and started feeling like a map. A map pointing toward a single origin. One individual. A name that appeared repeatedly in coded references, redacted notes, and fragmented testimonies. Not always directly identified, but always implied. Then came the final discovery. A locked recording device hidden inside Victor's personal safe. It required multiple authentication steps to access. When it finally opened, only one audio file remained. Mara played it in a silent interrogation room. Victor's voice filled the space. Weak. Strained. But deliberate. "If you're hearing this," he began, "then I didn't make it far enough." A pause. Then he continued. "I found her too late." Mara leaned forward instantly. Her pen froze above the notepad. Victor described years of investigation that had eventually converged on a single figure responsible for coordinating manipulation across legal, psychological, and personal domains. A person who never appeared in public records. Never stayed in one identity long enough to be traced. But who always left traces in other people's lives. Victor's breathing in the recording became heavier. More urgent. "I tried to expose her once," he said. "That was my mistake." A long silence followed. Then the final revelation. "I know what they call her in the files," Victor whispered. "But I know her by another name." Mara held her breath. Victor spoke the name clearly. Eleanor Voss. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the recorder. Mara looked down at the open folder on the table, and realized, with a cold shock spreading through her chest, that Eleanor Voss had already appeared in multiple cases she had reviewed without ever realizing the connection. A dead woman. A ghost in every investigation. And somehow, the center of all of them. Then the recording ended, leaving only one question behind. How could a dead woman collect so many secrets, without ever being seen alive? Detective Mara Ellison did not sleep for 3 nights. Victor Hale's final recording replayed in her mind until the words lost meaning and became rhythm instead of information. Eleanor Voss. The name had no official footprint in any active database, yet it appeared across multiple sealed investigations spanning decades. At first, Mara assumed coincidence. Then she started mapping the cases. The missing woman from Black Hollow. The boy who returned after 3 years. The house without mirrors and its predictive journal. The prosecutor's compromised murder trial. And now Victor Hale's secret archive of blackmail operations. Each case had been treated as isolated. Each had been closed, archived, or left unresolved. But when placed together, they formed a pattern too precise to ignore. Mara pinned timelines across her office wall, connecting events with colored strings. The further she built the map, the more disturbing it became. Every case overlapped with a moment where an unknown female presence appeared. Not always directly witnessed. Sometimes inferred. Sometimes described differently. A caregiver. A neighbor. A consultant. A visitor. A teacher. But in every instance, victims reported the same psychological signature. Subtle manipulation. Delayed emotional responses. Confusion surrounding memory. A sense that reality had been gently adjusted rather than violently altered. Mara dug deeper into archival records. Old police reports. Hospital intake forms. Child services documentation. Court transcripts. And buried within them, she found references that had never been connected. A woman seen near multiple incidents across different states under different names. Evelyn Harper. Eleanor Voss. Dr. L. Vance. Anna Keller. Each identity officially verified at the time. Each identity later abandoned or disproven. But the pattern remained consistent. Every persona appeared only long enough to influence an outcome. then disappeared completely. As if she understood exactly how long she could remain visible before being erased by systems designed to forget. Mara began to realize something far more disturbing. This was not random interference. It was choreography. Each case represented a controlled outcome, a psychological experiment disguised as tragedy. The missing woman had left behind emotional instability in her husband. The returned boy exhibited identity displacement. The psychiatric nurse experienced predictive behavioral influence. The prosecutor's case collapsed under hidden interpersonal leverage. And Victor Hale had uncovered the architecture behind it all. But what unsettled Mara most was the gaps. The moments between cases. The years where nothing seemed to happen. Except something clearly was. Victims didn't just appear affected. They appeared selected. Carefully chosen based on access, vulnerability, and proximity to systems of authority or emotional dependency. Then Mara found the file that changed everything. It was mislabeled in an archived digital storage unit under cold reviews. Inside was a photograph taken from an old surveillance camera outside a county hospital. The image was grainy, time-stamped 20 years earlier. It showed a woman walking alone through a corridor. She was partially turned away from the camera, but her posture was unmistakable. Calm, controlled, familiar. The file contained no official identification, only a note from the original analyst. Subject confirmed deceased 2 decades prior. Name, Eleanor Voss. Cause of death, unverified drowning incident. Status, closed case. Mara stared at the image longer than she intended. Something about it felt wrong. Not the presence of the woman. The absence of finality. Because if Eleanor Voss had truly died 20 years ago, then every case tied to her afterward should have collapsed on itself. But instead, they had continued. Evolving. Expanding. As if her influence had not ended at death, but survived it. Mara closed the file slowly. For the first time in her career, she considered a possibility no official investigation would accept. That Eleanor Voss was not a person in the conventional sense of identity, but a method, a system, or something that learned how to continue operating even after the world declared it dead. And somewhere, buried inside the oldest unresolved case, evidence was beginning to suggest something impossible. Eleanor Voss may not have vanished 20 years ago. She may have simply stopped being noticed. The abandoned psychiatric institution stood at the edge of a forgotten valley, surrounded by dead trees and cracked asphalt that once formed a patient transport road. Ravens circled above it. The building itself seemed to breathe in silence. Detective Mara Ellison arrived alone. Officially, the site had been closed for 23 years following a series of structural failures and administrative shutdowns. Unofficially, it had been erased from most public records. But Victor Hale's files pointed here repeatedly. And so did every unresolved thread in the Eleanor Voss investigations. The main doors were unlocked. That was the first warning. Inside, the air was thick with dust and chemical residue. Hallways stretched into darkness, lined with peeling paint and faded signage labeling rooms that no longer existed in practice. Therapy Wing A. Behavioral Observation Unit. Memory Reconstruction Lab. Mara moved slowly, flashlight cutting through the gloom. At first, the institution appeared abandoned. Then she found evidence of recent occupation. Footprints in dust that should have settled years ago. Fresh scratches on metal doors. Electrical systems that had been manually reactivated. The deeper she went, the more the building felt less like a ruin and more like something paused. Waiting. In the lower levels, she discovered sealed patient rooms. Each contained remnants of controlled environments. Observation chairs bolted to floors. Two-way mirrors shattered from the outside. Faded restraints still attached to beds. And names scratched into walls. Not randomly. Repeated patterns. The same individuals from earlier cases. Sarah Whitmore. Owen Parker. Clara Bennett. Daniel Mercer. Emily Hart. Each name appeared in different rooms, as if they had all been subjects within the same unseen framework. Mara's breath tightened. This wasn't random, she whispered into her recorder. This was structured. In the central archive chamber, she found what remained of the institution's core files. Most had been destroyed, but one sealed cabinet remained intact. Inside were classified documents labeled under an experimental program name, Project Nightfall. The documents described behavioral influence trials conducted over decades. Not simple observation, but active manipulation of perception, memory, and emotional response. The goal was not treatment. It was reshaping. Subjects were selected based on psychological vulnerability, then exposed to carefully engineered life events designed to test how identity could be rewritten without awareness. Mara felt nausea building as she read further. And then she saw the oversight notes. One name appeared repeatedly as an external consultant. Eleanor Voss. But not as a patient. As a coordinator. A strategist. Someone overseeing how trauma could be distributed across human lives like a controlled variable. Mara stepped back from the file cabinet. This isn't just influence, she said aloud. It's design. A sound echoed from deeper inside the building. Footsteps. Slow. Intentional. She followed them down a corridor leading to a sealed observation wing. The doors were already open. Inside, she found a room filled with chairs facing a wall of one-way glass. Behind it, an older control room remained intact. Monitors still hummed softly. Power had been restored. Mara approached the central console. The screens flickered to life one by one. At first, static. Then images. Live feeds. Different locations. Different angles. And then her stomach dropped. Because she recognized one of the feeds immediately. It showed her. Inside the building. Walking through the corridors she had just left. Recording herself. Following a path she had already taken. But the timestamp was wrong. The footage was not real time. It was earlier. Recorded. Observed. Which meant someone had been watching her entire investigation unfold. Every step. Every discovery. Every conclusion. Mara turned sharply toward the darkened glass. For a moment, she saw her reflection. Then, just behind it, another figure appeared in the control room. Standing perfectly still. Watching her. And for the first time since entering the institution, Mara realized she was not the one uncovering the past. She was being documented inside it. Noah had never felt the apartment this quiet. Even the city outside seemed distant, muffled, as if the world had stepped back to give the tape space to speak. He stared at the cassette player. The machine that had carried him through 10 stories of missing people, impossible memories, and a name that refused to die. Eleanor Voss. Evelyn Harper. Different voices. Same presence. The tape finally stabilized. And then he heard it. Not Evelyn. Not Noah. A different voice entirely. Calm. Male. Familiar in a way he could not explain. If you are hearing this, the voice began, then you did exactly what I needed you to do. Noah's throat tightened. He reached for the stop button. But his hand froze before it touched the machine. The voice continued. I didn't tell you stories, it said. I guided you through documentation. Real cases. Real fractures in memory. Real people who saw too much or remembered too little. A pause. Then the truth started unfolding. The voice explained Project Nightfall. Not as theory, but as confession. A long-term psychological framework designed not just to observe human trauma, but to replicate it across unrelated lives until patterns became invisible. Eleanor Voss was not a single person. She was a role. An identity passed between individuals trained to observe, intervene, and rewrite outcomes without leaving direct evidence. The missing woman. The returned boy. The predictive witness. The compromised trial. The collector of secrets. All had intersected with the same system. Not coincidence. Calibration. Noah felt the room tilt slightly. The voice continued. Softer now. But systems evolve, it said. And observers eventually become part of what they observe. A list of names appeared on Noah's computer screen without him touching it. His investigations. His uploads. His commentary on unsolved cases. His reach. His audience. All highlighted. All linked. The voice spoke again. You were never outside this, it said. You were selected because you notice patterns too easily. Noah stepped back from the desk. The cassette player continued on its own. I could have chosen anyone, the voice said. But you were the most useful. A pause. Then the final truth. You helped assemble the complete map. Noah's breath shortened. The room felt smaller. Closer. The voice softened. And now you're ready for the final step. A long silence followed. Then the words that broke everything. If you're hearing this, you're already part of story number 6. The tape abruptly stopped. Noah stared at the machine, frozen. And that was when he heard it. Not from the speakers. Not from memory. From behind him. A slow, deliberate step inside the room. The kind of sound that does not belong to recordings. Only to something that has already arrived.